Our text indeed this morning is Isaiah chapter 40, verses 12 through 29. And will you stand with me as we hear again this word from the Lord? Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, and closed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult, and who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compare with him? An idol? A craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, spreads them like a tent to dwell in, who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. The word of the Lord. You may be seated. God has appointed Isaiah to announce his return here in chapter 40, to lift valleys and level mountains, to clear a way that stretches through wilderness and desert for the triumphal return of the eternal King. And none of this is to be done discreetly. It is to be joyfully declared to all with strong voices from the highest mountain that behold, the Lord God victoriously comes with all the spoils of life and eternity, all of joy and delight, all of love and mercy and grace with him. The one and only, mighty and majestic, the sovereign and shepherd, the omnipotent God has come to express his love and power through the tenderest of shepherding terms, to tend his flock, gathering lambs in his arms, hugging them as he carries them, gently leading those that are with young. And then from these gentlest of terms, like a cellist who has held a long, sustaining, soft note, there is this yum, this immediate rush of movement, these soaring, awesome, humbling, daunting, rhetorical questions reflecting on who God is. And so verse 12 begins, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Okay, there's some perspective for you. God has presided over the entirety of creation, not in some general sense, not with the indifference of the deist's clockmaker, but rather in exactitude, measuring, marking, enclosing, weighing the grandest elements of our earth, being as to him so small as to weigh and measure. And who did God run this by? Verse 14 continues, so what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult? Who helped him better understand? Who taught him right and wrong? Who helped him be more learned and sophisticated and modern? Who showed him what God really needed to know in the oversight and rule of creation? No creation committee was formed. There was no vote taken on its acceptability. God has not put any in the position of advisor or trustee or as a member of the board. He doesn't answer to shareholders, and his job performance is not up for review. J. Alec Maltaire, Old Testament scholar, says of this that the Lord works with unaided wisdom. Why? For behold, verse 15, all of the collective power, might, and wisdom of the nations, of all the princes and rulers in verse 23, and just read in that all of presidents and parliaments and congresses, of all who inhabit God's creation. And Isaiah is using as extreme of language as contrast as possible. The summation of them all, of knowledge and power, of all that creation could ever offer from the beginning of eternity to the end, is but a drop in the bucket. Like dust on a scale, as less than nothing and emptiness, verse 17. Like flour you brush off your countertop. Like dandelions, one breath of God, verse 24, and they are carried off in the wind as stubble. And he continues this thread of thought in verse 22. All the inhabitants of the world, the billions of people who have ever existed, are to him like grasshoppers. And like we stretch out the sheets on our bed to make it, so too with equal mastery, God reigns above and stretches out the entire heavens. It's important to clarify that these poetic reflections of God are not speaking to the worth of nations and peoples to God, as we will come to see quite the opposite. Rather, only in comparison to the power and work of God, there is none. All of which begs the question posed in verses 18 and 25. So to whom then will you liken God? To whom then will you compare me? Who will you ascribe devotion and authority and power to? Some absurd idol, some thing, some wooden or metal thing? Look up, God says in verse 26. Look up to the vastness and incomprehensible magnitude of the stars and the universe. This one planet among billions of stars in this galaxy. This galaxy, 100,000 light years in width, which means the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, the equivalent of circling the earth 7.5 times in 1 second. 1, 2, 3, circling the earth 22.5 times. That speed, traveling for 1 year, times 100,000. That's 100,000 light years. That's the size of our galaxy, and our galaxy is one of billions of other galaxies, each of them hundreds of thousands of light years in scope. Does your head hurt yet? In verse 26, he brings out their host by number, calling them all by name. And the image there with the use of that word host is a military one. Robert Alter, in his translation of Isaiah, in that vein, he translates that as God musters the host of heavens, the stars as their supreme commander. So the totality of the universe's unfathomable magnitude is to God as subordinates to be called to attention. Indeed, who then is like our God? This sort of unrelenting, overwhelming rhetorical questioning as to God's majesty, it is grab you by the collar, gripping, and it doesn't let up. But what's the purpose? Is it just to humble the listener? Got it, Lord? You big, me not. Is it for educational purposes, a theological treatise of sorts? A reminder of who God is? Well, sort of. There is a question raised in verse 21, and it's an interruption of sorts from the flow of the rhetoric, like something inserted into the melody of a song. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? But there's no elaboration on that. So we're just moving quickly back to these rhetorical questions. And it's building and building and building. It's crescendoing to verse 27, and then it's as if it all just stops so that you can hear. So why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Here it is again. Have you not known? Have you not heard? There's the why. There is what all of verses 12 to 26 has been addressing. Now remember, when Israel is hearing this, they are in exile. Now there's everything that meant physically. No home, no land. Everything that their ancestors had bled and died for, that their spiritual mothers and fathers were led by God to, where they had settled as a people, built families, consummated marriages, birthed babies, buried their elders, gone. And not only just gone, hard enough as that would be, but gone because pagan, idolatrous, foreign powers had overtaken them, and they had determined that Israel was to be banished. Which is a good segue for, more importantly, everything that exile meant theologically. Israel's land wasn't just about dirt. They're settling not just about a nice spot that they found to establish a nation in. This was promised land. Their temple was not just some church, but the literal dwelling place of God. A gloriously majestic complex that was a constant reminder of God's presence in the middle of them. And it was razed to the ground, totally destroyed. And the land and the people for whom the watchfulness of God were to be upon were no longer. What did that mean for them as God's people? What did that mean for God? Had he lost? Had he been defeated? Had they been wrong about the capability of God? Or worse than defeat, and to the heart of verse 27, had he simply removed his hand from them, looked away from them, and abandoned them? While we do not share in the same sort of gravity as exile was, arguably our lives for 19 months have seemingly been governed by an invading force. A force we didn't see coming. A force whose ripple effects and staying power we could not have fathomed. Can you imagine in March of last year, if someone would have told you that we would still very much be in it, not just in December of 20, in December of 21, it would have been an almost unbearable burden. And for many it has. You know, we've all been put through it. And it has been comprehensive in scope. Not a single area of our life has been spared from having to adjust. Family, friends, church, work, vacations, celebrations, graduations, births, deaths, funerals, burials, schools. Our entire lives have had to be reconceived in almost every imaginable way. And it's all been an exercise in grief, meaning it's all been an exercise in loss. Loss of norms, loss of expectations, loss of dreams, loss of jobs, loss of people, loss of this thing you were going to do, loss of that thing your family was planning to do, loss of family getting together. 2 classes of students had their calendars essentially wiped. No varsity year for you, gone. No prom for you, gone. Ever. You'll never get a redo. And this 3rd class has had an incredibly disruptive year that only feels less because of the misery of what the past 3 semesters felt like. To simply exist for these 20 months is to have experienced loss. And everything else is added on top of that, which for many includes loss of family and friends, chairs empty for Christmas dinner this year. Grief on top of grief on top of grief. And for almost a year, many of these men and women, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, grandfathers and grandmothers, image bearers of God, they died alone. And if you think the devastation can only be physical illness, I heartbreakingly recommend you Google youth mental health crisis. And all of the articles and data will pop up. Or just talk to any parent with a child or a teenager. Or talk to the child or the teenager. Or talk to the businessman or businesswoman who's had to reinvent their business multiple times, nothing ever settled, everything always changing, having to fire people, having people just leave. Talk to the teacher who's had just about all the joy and meaning of their vocation absolutely wrung out of them. Talk to those who've lived this thing in a hospital setting, who've watched person after person after person after person die. whose only coping mechanism is to either superhumanly suppress deep sadness, all the while knowing that one day that bill will come due to pay, or totally empty yourself of empathy and just be emotionally numb. Perhaps we all, in ways unique to our lives, know what an existential exile feels like. To be removed and seemingly banished involuntarily, even if still physically present, but to be existentially banished from all of what life was and all of what life was going to be. And so perhaps, too, even if you haven't voiced it to anyone, you, like Israel, have wondered the same thing in verse 27. Is my way hidden from the Lord? And my right disregarded by my God? Dadgummit, God, have you forgotten about me? Is my life just hidden from you? And Isaiah 40, and that night in Bethlehem, is good news to people who feel hidden and forgotten. Receive it as such. So why do you say, and just put your name right here, "O Jacob"? Why do you speak, "O Israel"? That my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God. And there's such a love in this question. Have you not known? Have you not heard? And of course, this is to Israel. This is to God's people. And the answer is, of course they know. And of course you know. And of course they've heard. And of course you've heard. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him, to her, to his child who has no might, he increases strength. All of the towering, rhetorical questions of God's transcendence was to reinforce who it is exactly that loves you, who looks over you, who sustains you, who strengthens you. That God does not forget his people. And he hasn't forgotten you. His people's lives are ever before him, and so is yours. You and I may grow faint and be wearied. He does not. You and I may be at a loss of understanding. He is not. And he gives power to the faint. And even if you feel on empty, entirely depleted, to you, he gives strength. Now, to be sure, there is a look to eternity in all of this. That Isaiah 40 will be entirely fulfilled when God completes his work of making all things new. Because circumstances don't immediately change for Israel. Not hardly. It's hundreds of years until anything changes. And then one day a girl in Nazareth is told by an angel that she will bear a son. And God decisively begins this Isaiah 40 work. All shall be well when all things are made new, but our lives exist in the meantime. And in the meantime, the way God answers Isaiah 40 in your life is the way that he answered it in Bethlehem. In Emmanuel, God with us. In Jesus. I can almost assure you that our circumstances will not change as any of us in here would like. But there were plenty of things wrong in Jerusalem and in the surrounding countries in Scripture. Plenty. And the answer was not utopian circumstances. Probably won't be for us either. The answer for them and the answer for you is that you are not alone in your circumstances. Your life is not lived removed from God. The same God who measures the waters in the hollow of his hand, who marks off the heavens with a span, who encloses the dust of the earth in a measure, weighs the mountains in scales, weighs the hills in a balance. The same God who has unrivaled, matchless wisdom, understanding, and righteousness. The same God before whom all authority and power of the nations and its peoples are a drop in the bucket. The same God who is to the expanse of the universe as you are to laying out a blanket for a picnic. The same God who expresses that level of power and authority through tending a flock like a shepherd, like gathering lambs in his arms, holding them tightly and gently leading those that are with young. That God is God with you. That same God sees you, knows you, understands you, and loves you in Jesus. So to those who feel hidden and forgotten, behold, the glory of the Lord has been revealed. Go to him, pray to him, listen for him, read and meditate and reflect upon him in Scripture. Stop your striving and rest in him. Open yourself up and receive from him. Power where you are faint, strength where you are weary. You are not hidden and you are not forgotten.